Hi, and welcome to Research Team 3.2 group discussion about psychological concepts and how they relate to fake news and misinformation. I'm Nick, and the concept that I'd like to discuss is conformity. Conformity falls under the broader social psychological concept of social influence, defined as the process by which individuals' thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are influenced by the presence and actions of others. So, conformity as a form of that can be defined as the tendency for individuals to adjust their attitudes and behaviors to match others in a group. I love the famous Asch conformity experiments from the 1950s. They demonstrate how powerful social influence can be in a group setting. Even when the correct answer, in that case, the length of a line, is incredibly obvious, people will conform to the group and choose the wrong answer because others in the group are doing that. So, why do people conform to group pressure? Well, there's a range of reasons. So we are social animals. So we want to fit in and be accepted. We want to avoid social rejection. We want to reduce social uncertainty. We want to align with dominant opinions. We get worried about what others think of us, etc., etc. So psychologically, it can feel safer to agree with a group, even if they're wrong, which they may not be, rather than sticking out. And so that is the definition of conformity. So, in the context of believing and sharing fake news content, which is content designed to trick or be false, it's helpful to understand that people can conform to a perceived social norm. So, conformity suspends or overrides critical thinking, which is assessing the veracity of claims in the content, seeing if they are logically consistent, updating our models of understanding with some sort of awareness of our own fallibility. So, where someone is in a group that promotes fake news about vaccines, for example, people can conform to a perceived social norm that is false. For example, vaccines cause autism or have GPS trackers in them or something like that. So, research has shown that vaccine hesitant people consistently misperceived the social norm of vaccination, believing that others were more hesitant than they actually were. You could call this a false consensus bias on the social norm of vaccination. Other research showed parents overestimate the anti vaccine beliefs of other parents. So it's like the illusion of consensus, just like Asch created is in his conformity experiments. So researchers were able to perform normative feedback to participants, which compared participants' perceptions of other people's anti vaccine beliefs with actual normative belief levels. And this showed significantly reduced personal belief in anti-vaccine beliefs at immediate post-test. So these kinds of studies show that it is not just the content of misinformation that matters, but the social norm perception around those beliefs. But that it is possible to intercept the conforming to these perceived norms with appropriate interventions.
Thank you, Nick. I have a couple of questions. Could you please explain in a little bit more detail some of the interventions that the researchers used in the anti-vaccine experiment?
Yes, they were very interesting, actually. What they did is they tried to strategically shift those perceived norms. And for example, there was messaging interventions that highlight accurate vaccination norms, but in a more personalized way rather than just like statistical corrections. For example, most people like you choose to vaccinate. I thought that was really interesting. Also, sharing correct data about planned uptake of vaccines helped shift the social norm because it was based on the intentions of people and not the raw data of what they did. So it feels quite nuanced, but strategically shifting the belief that everyone else thinks anti-vax is normal did show results in correcting the fake news and misinformation uptake in the case of vaccine hesitancy. But it is definitely worth saying that these interventions, moved the needle, pun intended, a little bit, but certainly it doesn't solve the problem outright as it's a pretty complex issue.
Yeah, that makes sense actually. Okay. Do you think there are any other consistent ways that group members enforce conformity?
Yes, there are lots of active ways that groups can reinforce those false and fake beliefs and conformity. They can discourage questioning of the group's beliefs by sort of stifling disagreement. They can frame the group as morally superior. Often there is an outgroup, like the enemy could be the government or scientists, or in the case of anti-vaccine rhetoric. There can be active stereotyping or caricaturing of that outgroup. So this is probably more in the realm of groupthink, but I think conformity and groupthink overlap, and all of the things I just mentioned act as primers for people in the group to conform. I just want to do one more quote from the research from the anti-vax stuff, which is really interesting. Moral norms, i.e., the perceived standard others agree with, includes possible sanctions or a sense of shame if individuals do not follow or conform to that perceived norm. So that's an interesting crossover between social norms and moral norms, and the challenge people have with sort of making personal health decisions that have real impacts by outsourcing their thinking to the group and conforming or not, and potentially paying a social cost for going against the group.
Yeah, that makes sense because when you conform, you often stop thinking for yourself and let the group decide for you, basically.
It
And
just shuts down that critical thinking. Yeah.
it does. Yeah. Thank you, Nick. Hi, everyone. I am Daman, and I would like to present on inoculation theory. Before I get into it, I would like to present some more information on why I chose this topic. Fake news is created intentionally to influence people, whereas misinformation is a type of fake news that is created irrespective of the source or intent. Due to the bombardment of COVID-19 health misinformation in 2020, the World Health Organization declared infodemic. And in 2022, the World Economic Forum stated that one of the areas with least risk mitigation efforts was misinformation. Fake news has the capacity to alter a person's social and political positioning that affects societal issues. Once it has spread, people socially identify with it and they are more motivated to seek related misinformation. Therefore, it becomes harder to undo the influence even after the misinformation has been formally corrected. So, I believe prevention is better than cure. Now, the question is if it's even possible to immunize against spread of misinformation that mimics the spread of virus in the body. Yeah, this is where inoculation theory comes into picture. So, in social psychology, inoculation theory is synonymous to how vaccination works against viral contagions in biology. The intervention starts with presenting a person or a group of people with the fact that threat of persuasive attack is imminent. It's like people are forewarned that at some point in their life they will be manipulated by persuasive misinformation. So rather than using the traditional approach of debunking misinformation that presents supportive facts against it, inoculation theory introduces a weakened form of misinformation at the intervention, and then they refute it by presenting the counter arguments. So let's take one example to understand this better. In 2021, during COVID-19 pandemic, there was this misinformation that a doctor died after getting the vaccination within just 2 weeks. Now, this played very well into anti-vaccination sentiment, where the misinformation was made to sound causal rather than correlational, actually. It was shared on Facebook so many times, causing damage to attitudes for vaccination. In such cases, inoculation theory can actually be used in an intervention quite nicely by providing people with an example of how in the past everyone feared smallpox vaccines and thought that they would turn into human cow hybrids, as you can see in one of this, little screenshot that I've added there. So now, yeah, the goal is to introduce antibodies for misinformation rather than to convince the people, basically. So people can look at such examples as a motivation to want to protect themselves from misinformation. The research on psychological inoculation has been shown to look promising, but there are some limitations when it comes to designing these experiments. One was who would be considered the credible source? And can people be protected from the misinformation coming from the source they trust? So, my research plan will actually be the extension of whether the inoculation effect increases or decreases when pre bunking is provided by the trusted source versus the credible source. Thank you. Over to you for any questions.
It's such a great named theory, isn't it? Like inoculation
Yeah.
theory. And I guess I'm wondering, like, you've used the example of it relating to personal health decisions, but can we use inoculation theory against like different forms of misinformation?
Yeah, actually, there was a lot of research in the research papers that I've read. It showed that if people are inoculated for just climate change misinformation, they could actually use the same technique that they have learned there for
Hmm.
other forms of misinformation as well, such as health or politics or anything else. So inoculation theory doesn't really target the facts or examples. It targets the technique of misinformation, basically. So I think that's a really good thing that I got to know. Yeah.
So fascinated we can vaccinate against misinformation.
Yeah, I know.
And so what about like longevity? If a person is given an intervention, are we talking like years they'll be resistant to it, or does it, can inoculation theory sort of withstand the test of time in that sense, do you think?
Yeah, so the experiments show that after 2 months since the first intervention, people actually forget how to be resistant to persuasive attacks of misinformation. But the good news is, if they receive regular booster interventions, the technique stayed with them for a longer time. So it just seems like, the intervention itself of inoculation theory is not the sure shot way to get rid of this issue of misinformation. I believe that it would require a combination of multiple different interventions and not just the inoculation theory intervention, probably mix in conformity intervention as well, like you mentioned earlier in your topic.
So you're saying that we haven't completely solved
No.
misinformation in this chat, but we got that. We did pretty well,
Yeah,
I think.
we
All right.
did.
Thanks very much, Gemma. That was lovely. Well done. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.